Okay. Hi, my name is Katelyn. Today we're going to be interviewing Dr. Stevens. Can you please tell us your name and your association with UC?
Martha Stevens. I came to UC along with my husband to teach there, and I was in the English department. He taught political science.
And I apologize for the technical difficulties we've had earlier. Can you please reiterate what your work was at UC?
Well, I came in, as I say, in 1967 as a new assistant professor. We had just finished our PhDs at Indiana University. And I taught a lot of different courses at UC over those early years. I taught a good bit of freshman English. I sort of liked to do that. I sort of liked to get kids that had just arrived on campus and see what they knew and were coming from. And I taught various other courses mostly in modern literature. And I'll never forget a certain sophomore course I taught. Everybody in those days, all the students that were going to get English majors, had to take a sophomore literature course and then go on to major courses. And so I set up a course called Literature and Marxism. And I wondered if it would be approved for me to teach that. It's not something that would have been offered otherwise or in the past. And some faculty kind of objected to it. But the chairman said it was okay. So it was listed as one of the sophomore lit courses. Well, came into class the very first day, looked around at the guys, usually about 30 people, I believe, and I told them what the course would be about. Some barely knew the name of it. They just wanted to get this requirement off. I said, well, yeah, Marxism, we'll be talking about it. And what American writers have in common with Marxist writers and how they feel about it. And a few students got up and left. They thought this was too much, or trek. But, so, now that course went on the full year in those days, and we were on a quarter system. And I struggled with the class for a while. They didn't know if they wanted, others didn't know if they really wanted to hear much about Karl Marx and his American writers that were associated with that tremendous movement. So I struggled with them for a while, and I thought, I don't know if these guys are going to get interested or not. I forget what American writers or English writers we talked about the first quarter. I tried to kind of break them in slowly to the radical literature that we have in English, so-called radical. Steinbeck, who wrote Grapes of Wrath. To some people at that time, that was kind of a tray, and for a while he considered himself a socialist, I believe. His later books were quite different and more kind of ordinary themes. But anyway, I felt they gradually came around to liking the idea that various writers in English that were particularly interesting were, in some ways, they shared quite a bit with Marxism. And so it was a lot of fun, really. And in the end, when we finally did do the most modern writers at that time, Steinbeck, Grapes of Wrath, you may remember this. I don't know if people study it anymore, but it was about poor people caught in the Dust Bowl. Their farms were drying up, and they had to go somewhere else. That was our fault, the whole country. Oh my God, the way we destroyed the grasslands and everything was what caused the Dust Bowl. You know, cattle, for instance. But they had to flee, and they went to California. They went that way, you know. And life was so hard for them, and it was so hard in California. Oh, the Grapes of Wrath. People, you hear sometimes today, people say, the grapes of wrath are growing in the people every day. Meaning people are getting more and more upset with the way things are for everybody. And yes, you hear that sometimes today. Anyway, that was a lot of fun, that course. And I taught later on, I taught advanced courses in mostly in modern literature, though I know I had a seminar in Dickens, Charles Dickens. I mean, he was a great crusader in a lot of ways, you know. I mean, he had grown up poor near London, and he always kind of sided with common people and poor people and struggling people there. A lot of his stories have to do with the lower classes. So that was nice to do a seminar with him. So, I mean, all kinds of things, you know.
I also am familiar with your book, The Treatment. And I know that it talks about the radiations that were done. Could you speak more about this and what happened and why not many people are still aware of it?
Yes, thank you. Well, it's still hard for me to think back on those days. But just 21 people died in those experiments at our university. Over 90 had the so-called treatments, were irradiated thinking they were being treated for cancer. They didn't know they were in an experiment of any kind, much less that it was for the military. The Department of Defense signed us up here at UC to do these tests, and they lasted for over 10 years, because they wanted to see what would happen to soldiers in a nuclear battlefield. How much radiation could they absorb and still fight on? That was the whole point of the experiments. But the subjects were poor people. There were many black people, more blacks than whites, as I recall. At least as many, probably rather, because General Hospital, where these took place, in those days, starting in the 60s, was a place where poor people went. And blacks had to go there. No other hospital would take them. You had to go to General Hospital. So this was black people and poor whites to draw on for subjects of their experiments. So the way I was the first person outside the College of Medicine to know what was happening. The very first person in the city, as far as I've ever known. And here's how I found out about it. In the hall one day, I'd been here about 4 years or something. It was during the Vietnam War, and some of us were marching downtown with others, trying to prevent or stop the Vietnam War. Terrible war, terrible. Never, in my opinion, never should have been there at all. Terrible crimes committed by us. Well, these were Vietnam days. So, in the hall one day, a friend of mine from another department said, "Oh, Martha, I got to show you something." And he pulled out a copy. I'm pretty sure it was the Village Voice. There was a short article in there that said some kind of military research was going on our campus. And this person, in fact, had come here to see what it was and had wanted to interview some kind of experiments. He wanted to interview some of the subjects, but the College of Medicine would not allow him to. So he could not get anywhere. Well, I said, "My God, we don't want any war research on this campus." God. So I said, "Well, listen, let's find out what it's all about." And so I had a quarter's leave coming up, and so I had a little time. I was still teaching right then, but so I went over to the College of Medicine, and the director of the college was very friendly and nice to me, but he said, "Miss, there's no reason for me to give you any documents from the doctors who are doing these tests." He admitted they were doing tests of some kind, but you wouldn't be able to read them. You're an English teacher. I said, "Oh, well, I've studied a little bit about radiation. I understand that radiation is," and he said, I went 3 times. Well, the last time, when I entered his office at the College of Medicine, Dr. Gall, Edward Gall, there was a big stack of papers on his desk. He said, "Miss, I'm going to let you have these, but I'm sure that you won't be able to make anything of it." Now, to this day, I assume that Dr. Gall did not know what was in them. He trusted the investigators that they were doing the right things. He didn't know. Because why would he have turned them over? I mean, we'd learned they weren't classified, so we could have gotten them, but he could have caused us to, maybe even get an attorney or something to get hold of them. But he gave them to me. So anyway, I drove back to my campus, to the main campus, parked in front of McMicken Hall where I taught. In those days, you could park on the drive. And I had a 2:00 class, but it was quite a ways off, so I sat there in my car and pulled out these papers. I thought, what do I have here? And I started reading them. And it was clear right away what had happened. People thought they were being treated for cancer, and that some had died. I saw right away because they had profiles of each of the people they had irradiated every year. When they sent a report back to the Defense Department, it included at the back of each paper a profile of each of the people they had irradiated. So naturally those I read, some of them. I thought, oh my God, some died from this radiation, and their families never knew. They thought they died of cancer. I could see that, right? I mean, I didn't know how many or anything, but I saw that some. So, I don't know, I got out of my car, I walked around the back of McMicken Hall, looked over towards the towers of the medical school. God, right here on this campus, they were killing people. Well, anyway, I took those papers home that quarter. And at Christmas time, I mean, at night, sitting at that dining room table, my husband would read stories to the kids, and then or one of us would, and when we got them in bed, we had three children. Let me see, 3 children, or were there 3? That would probably just 2 at that time. When they got in bed and things quieted down, I got out all my papers and studied and studied and studied. And after, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks of studying and everything, I wrote up a 4-page paper, my findings about the people that had been irradiated and what happened to them. Now, I didn't know who they were. Each profile would have the initials, supposedly the initials of the patient being described, and the date of death. Their date. Yes, most had died by even those that, as far as we know, lived to die of cancer, they would have a date of, okay. So, but it was clear that I knew what radiation was. It takes about a month to kill you. The kind of dose they were giving people, it destroys your bone marrow. You can't make any new white blood cells. You will pass away. And it takes about a month. I had learned that, and at the extent of radiation they were getting, I mean, you know, if you'd been in the middle of a nuclear blast, I mean, you would go. But this would be like you were on the edges. And it would take a while to get you. And of course the dose is different. Some people got more radiation than others. So anyway, I wrote that paper up, and I said to my little group, the guy that had showed me the paper and all, we had a little group called the Junior Faculty Association. New young professors like I was, without tenure, you know. So I said, now look, you guys, I've studied and I have a paper. We got to tell everybody what happened here. I know what happened, and we got to tell everybody. So another friend in the group said, yes, we could have a press conference. Read your paper. Well, I guess I didn't say first. We sat, 4 of us sat at that dining room table of mine one night. I said, if we're gonna have a press conference and read this paper, let's be sure that it's accurate. I mean, you ask me anything. You haven't read the documents. But if there's something here that needs to be better documented, then let's do it. I can do it. And so there wasn't much for them to, they studied, and I probably made a few edits or added some documents. And so, all right. One of our group got up and left. He said, I don't want any part of this. But there were 4, as I recall, 4 of us left. So one of those 4 lined up our press conference. We had it right out on campus. I don't know if we tried to get a room inside or couldn't or didn't want to. I don't remember that. So we just set up a table out there and some chairs. Only a few people came. But a magical thing happened. And we didn't know it at the time, but the Washington Post sent a reporter. I mean, this friend that set up the press conference had notified. Smart, yeah, it was very smart, wasn't it? He notified the press, certain press, and so the Washington Post did send somebody, a stringer, you know, somebody that was stationed nearby or something. The Cincinnati Inquirer did not send anybody. You know? But the next day, That was a big story. Well, I mean, we thought it was a big story. It probably wasn't that big, like so, in the Washington Post. Well, all hell broke loose in the College of Medicine when that appeared. And to make a long story short, nobody, as far as we know, nobody was irradiated after that. There were certainly no reports it was over. I mean, that was it. So I have said all along, well, that 4-page paper of mine saved some lives. Now, I've written 6 or 7 other books. I mean, other than the one on those tests. But that 4-page paper might be more important than all my other little stuff. Gosh. So, it's been I think, kind of a tragic thing that right now in Cincinnati, there were times when they got very, I can explain that briefly too, but right now, it's being dismissed again. Because, I mean, the Inquirer won't cover anything about it. It's like, this is a dark chapter in Cincinnati history. Let's let it lie there. Let's don't bring it back up. And a lot of people don't know that it ever happened. Certainly newcomers wouldn't know. They didn't read the press in years past. And so that's why I spoke to the Democratic Forum on Tuesday about it. They asked, I was the speaker last Tuesday. We have a noon virtual forum every week. And some of even the older people there didn't know about it. I said, well, I mean, we just can't forget this, 90 people, well over 90 people were used in experiments that could have killed them. And it was a terrible crime. Well, as you know, you may know, Katelyn, there was a lot. Trying to make a long story short.
Take your time. We have all day.
Well, we didn't get anywhere with the press in 1971 when we had our press conference, except for the Washington Post. Thank God we stopped it. Well, we thought, well, attorneys should sue the university. Now that they know, they suddenly stopped it. They admitted, in effect, what they had done, and they need to be sued or sent to jail. I mean, somehow we didn't think of it that way. I sometimes do now. But we couldn't get any attorneys interested. They wouldn't go up against the university. We understood. I didn't try very hard. I think some of my group did. In those days, the only the paper in town, for instance, if they heard that something was going on at UC that might need to be covered, they would just make a call to maybe the president's office, and they'd say, "Oh, are y'all having some difficulties over there?" And the president or whoever they called would say, "Oh no, everything's okay." And no coverage in the Cincinnati press. But we had to be content. At least we stopped. Nobody else will die in those tests. Okay, skip ahead 40 years. It all popped up again when President Clinton set up an advisory committee to study the deliberate exposures of the Cold War. And we were mentioned because, I mean, even though there was no coverage here, they had been the Washington Post. Some papers had written to me about my paper read at the press conference. I mean, there was some knowledge around the country, if not here, as to what had happened to us. And so a panel of people came here from that committee that Clinton set up because we were among those to be studied. They came here and interviewed people, interviewed me, and in the report they finally, what started off that commission was that people were dying that lived in the areas where bomb tests were going on, I think Nevada. And so that's what led Clinton to set up that committee. I mean, who else died when we were doing such experiments or tests that shouldn't have been done? And so we became part of that. But the final report of the committee told about, yes, they did these experiments on cancer patients. They didn't say that anybody died. They weren't willing to say that. So, all right, that was in, 2000, long time since we had had them stopped here. And so some of us said, now look, we need to sue. We can, there was never, the descendants of the people that were irradiated need to go to court and demand redress. And so, we a few of us worked. Oh, I guess at that time, I said to my husband, my God, I said, look, here it is, 2000. My God, we stopped those tests, but I said, now people are suddenly interested in them again. And I said, but I don't know if I have the documents anymore. I may have thrown them away. And he said, no, I'm pretty sure they're down in the basement in an old filing cabinet down there. So I went down there, yep, there they were. So I called the Inquirer. I said, look, we're part of the Clinton Advisory Committee, blah, blah, blah. If you want to know what happened here and write a story, you can come and get the documents that the doctors put out about the patients, and you'll see the whole story. Well, a reporter came to my house. I said, and bring me back. Copy these if you want to. Bring them back to me. She did. She took them away. So the Inquirer had a story about that long. Didn't mention any deaths. You know. So I thought, okay. We had another paper, Cincinnati Post. I did the same thing with them. I called them up, told them, I have some papers I think you'd care about. They came out, they got them, they brought them back. 4 days later, a reporter there, I'm always forgetting his name, printed a front page story, Cincinnati Radiations Revealed. Well, you can imagine what happened at the Inquirer. They went bazooka. That was their story. Somebody else had it. They should have. That's the only way they ever covered it. Well, now, this reporter came right back to me. Oh, she came to the door. I said, what, Linda? She said, oh, you say you don't even read my paper, so I brought you a copy of it. And she said, listen, we're going to do this. I said, Linda, you didn't care. Your paper didn't care how many people died. So I'll work with the Post. Well, she would bring me the paper every day. My husband reminded me of that the last week. And the Post didn't really have the staff that they could take this on and try to find the families and all. So I ended up, well, this reporter, God, I went to class one day and she was waiting outside my classroom. I hadn't agreed to work. I said, Linda, no, didn't I tell you? But finally, I said I will have to work with her because they can find the families. See, if the paper goes around the community. Well, this graduate student I had, now this was 2000, when it all popped up again. I had a graduate student. She had gotten interested in the whole case when it popped back up. She knew I was in the center of it. And she told me, let me see, right before we went over to the Inquirer, she said, well, she said, look, we know the initials, and we have the dates of death. She said, I can find some of these people for you. I said, well, there is this great big office that has birth and death records. You could pull those down, those big ledgers. I couldn't do it. My vision and all, I can't do that. She said, but I will. I'll do it. She did. And she came back one night. She came over here. She said, Martha, we've got 3 families. We could start a lawsuit. I thought, oh my God. She said, you can call this person tonight. Ooh, I said, I don't know. I hate to call them. They don't know what happened to their. So I did. Greg Blair came over. He sat right there on this coffee table. I pulled out the profile of his mother. I said, Greg, do you think this is your mother's story of her treatment at UC? It was about a page and a half. He read it. He said, yes, that's my mother. I said, okay, all right. I said, now, we have attorneys that are interested in suing the university. If you want to be part of a lawsuit, then here's their card. You could call on them, but it's up to you. Well, he did go, and he became the named plaintiff of the lawsuit. Long story short, we got a real good judge. She was mortified at what she heard. She said, why, this is like the Nazis. They threw people out of planes. They contaminated them with diseases to see what would happen to soldiers that got those diseases. You did that here. Didn't you ever hear about the Nuremberg Code? She said to the doctors. So there were, let me see, I believe 11 defendants, doctors that had worked on this project. And they all had their own attorneys. I mean, I went a few times to the court. It lasted, about 3 years, I believe. It was so much litigation around it, so many. And God, the suits in that courtroom. Anyway, there was a judgment in favor of the families. See, all these, well, did I ever say? Sorry, I left this out. This woman that came to my door, and I finally worked with her. So she and I stayed in touch for about 6 months, 8 months, as they published the real story. And every time they published a new thing on it, somebody would call in and say, oh, I think my grandfather was irradiated. And then they would call me, is this man really? I said, yes, if that is so-and-so. By his initials, so to say, yes, that seems to be the fellow that was irradiated. And of course, they remembered what had happened at that time. They thought it was just cancer, but they remembered what their. So by the time, I I was the right-hand person of the Inquirer for about 6 years. It was very strange, but this Linda, I said, Linda, I'd call her Linda. Don't get patient 66 mixed up with 68. They're both named John. Oh, God. Now they won't talk to me at all, because they want to forget it again. They want to totally forget it. So, anyway, they found about 60 families called in. One woman said she was sitting at her desk at the Inquirer. She had a break, and she was sitting at her desk drinking a cup of coffee, and she saw their article about a woman named Lula Tarleton. She later told me this. Oh my God, that's my aunt, my great aunt. I didn't know she was in an experiment. She was one. Yeah, and that kind of thing was happening around town. And so, yeah, over 60 families were part of the lawsuit. So the lawsuit did not, wonderful judge, but at the end she decided for the plaintiffs. And she said, we will set up a committee of the attorneys, the family association, and to talk about what would be a proper settlement. Now, this was a civil suit, lucky for the doctors. And so the attorney that met from our side wasn't forceful. He was not forceful. He didn't much care exactly what the families got, as long as he could claim a victory. Or it seemed that way to me a little bit. No, I don't know if it was just that way. But he didn't ask for enough, and they only got $5 million to divide among all these descendants. So it wasn't a whole lot. If you had a big family, you wouldn't get much. And one woman that I had become friends with, whose mother was irradiated and died in the hospital 3 weeks later. She definitely died of, I have to take that in the dining room, she died of her radiation. She was okay at home. She was cooking supper for her children. She had breast cancer, but she was still active she had 3 somewhat small children and one older daughter who was about 18 and not living at home. And so the hospital called her name is Maud Jacobs, one day and said, we've got a new treatment for your cancer. So can you come over tomorrow for an appointment? So the next morning, she called a taxi. She lived not far from the university, but she didn't have a car. She called a taxi, put on her hat, as people did a lot in those days, went to the hospital, was irradiated, 150 rads. She thought it was treatment. Went back home. That night she was terribly ill, vomited all night. The next morning, her oldest daughter had a car, came and got her mother, took her back to the hospital. They put her in a room, and the older daughter told me later, years later, she said, I just took my coffee machine with me, and I stayed in the room with my mother the 3 weeks that she lived. So $5 million divided. She later told me, of course she was 40 or 50 by the time it popped up again. And we finally found people and all, and had the lawsuit. And she said, Martha, that wasn't much money. I mean, some families had 7 or 8 people that would qualify. And she said, Martha, I could take my share of that and spend it at Walmart in one weekend. Well, listen, that's the story. And we're still struggling today. Right now, we would like, because all these attacks on black people around the country are full of news, we'd like to be remembered, along with the others, you know, but can't be mentioned. Can't be mentioned. I called Cincinnati. I haven't wanted to talk about it for years. I want to do my other books, more cheerful books. But, I mean, I thought, no, we can't let this just go away and nobody even ever know that it happened. And I emailed Cincinnati Edition that comes on every day at 12 o'clock. They work with the Inquirer. It's an hour program. They love Cincinnati history. They're always telling us that some big project, some big church that was about to be demolished is now being fixed up. It's going to be beautiful again. I mean, they love this old history of Cincinnati. So, I mean, isn't this part of our history, you know? So I wrote them an email. I said, well, look, let's look at our darker history too. And I would be willing to talk with you about what happened to Cincinnati people back in the 60s. Never heard back from them at all. Didn't even write me back. And a reporter had been in touch with me. This was about 2 or 3 years ago now. He got wind of, he read my book, and he got riled up about the story, and he wanted to do a new story in the Inquirer. And he interviewed a lot of people, including my children. I said, well, what was it like when your mom was... I mean, he had a lot of interviews. My sister had been a paralegal for the law firm. They killed it. He couldn't run. They killed it. He did a lot of work on it, and then it didn't run. So you see, I mean, it's going to be just buried. If we're proud Cincinnatians, we don't want to remember that. Oh, gosh. Well, I'm sure there are other things you might want to talk about.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that story. It's really great to hear it from you, and I really hope that the memorial that is currently covered by a bush will soon be able to better remember those who have died in those treatments. Yeah.
Right. It's wonderful that students today are concerned.
Yeah.
That is wonderful. You young guys, oh, so many, boy. Y'all are getting a lot of things done.
Well, onto a more, I don't know if it's cheerful, but a different subject. I'm curious, have you, or what challenges have you faced working at UC being a woman? Because I know that gender has played a role in the treatment of different faculty members, so I was curious to see how it impacted your work.
I have no idea how things are today. Now, your professor is a woman, right?
Yes.
There probably are quite a few women faculty today.
Yes.
A lot. I don't know. Would you say quite a lot?
Yes.
Oh, okay. That's wonderful. when I came to UC, I wasn't at all sure they would hire me. We knew that they would hire my husband. He was the first of us to be hired. And we had both made applications around other universities before he had settled on this one. And none of them said they were hiring women. I don't remember which ones they were. 2 or 3 that he was considering, and so I would also apply. So he was hired here, and I applied. Let's see. I guess I don't know why they accepted me, but it was kind of unusual in 1967. But there had only been one woman hired in my department, which, I mean, we had a large, English is a big department, and a lot of men, I don't know, maybe 30, 25, 30 people teaching, and only one woman. And I believe, let me see, she had been moved up when another college closed that UC ran. They needed to provide her a job somewhere, so she came to UC, is the way I remember it. Anyway, yeah, only one other woman. Well, they just, I guess they happened to need a person in modern literature right then or something, and they did, so I was happy to be offered a job.
Did you ever notice being treated differently by your former faculty members due to being a woman? Did you ever notice? Did you ever notice how men were getting a different treatment than women were, and how they were often looked at as a higher priority?
Yes, some things came up, but you're never sure why you didn't get something. Some man did. I mean, so it wasn't blatant mistreatment of women, I don't think. We never, let me see, by the time I retired, I imagine maybe a third of the faculty were women. I retired somewhat early because of my vision. I was there about 21 years or something. And some people, or was it longer than that? I know I was just barely 60 when I left teaching. I had gotten to the point that I had to do a lot of poetry classes because I could read poems better than novels. And sometimes I would come to class, my poem would be this big. And I later had some treatment. I'm somewhat better today than I was when I left teaching. I had a certain surgeon in Boston that had operated on my eyes and had helped me quite a bit. I still have to read most things with a magnifying glass. I can drive. Probably shouldn't drive, but I drive some where I know exactly where I'm going. I can't really read the street signs very well. I can go straight to Norwood to the library and straight to Harmony. But in terms of treatment of women in those days, I don't know what they thought. Some departments never hired while I was, or for a long time, they did not hire any women. And I know there were 3 of us one time. I don't know, something was going on, a speaker was coming to campus that we didn't think should have been invited, having to do with the Nicaraguan Revolution or something. I mean, he was going to defend what we had done there, which was god-awful, we felt, at least three of us women. So we couldn't have convinced the men not to have him come and speak, so we stood outside where he was speaking and held up signs and everything. Oh, I don't know. But I won't say that they, as time went on, some of the women disagreed with each other on things. It wasn't always just women against men, you know.
Did you ever witness any student protests? And if you did, can you explain them?
Well, there weren't as many as I often wished there were. Let me see. When the Kent State people died at Kent State, we had quite a protest here, yes. And it got bad enough that the university closed. I never thought I'd see that happen. They were afraid that certain antics, I don't know, a desk was thrown out of an to the sidewalk from a certain office that wasn't respected, or I mean, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what caused it. Thinking back, I would have, my husband might remember what happened to cause us to close, as certain other universities did in Ohio. We were the, we were the ones. And the fact that the National Guard, was it, that, went to Kent State and Coast, added to the turmoil there, and eventually some people died, yeah. But there wasn't a lot of student protests during my years. Let me see, have I forgotten some of it? Probably. There were always, your outlying person who would join up with Planned Parenthood. So some of my women students definitely were active in rallies at Planned Parenthood offices and all near campus. There's one quite near campus. I believe it still exists there. And so, yeah, there were certain, I may be forgetting. As the wars came along and all, probably were students active. Often downtown. They would go to rallies downtown with other students from around, But as far as right on campus, in around, let me see, somewhere along about the middle of my career there, we did not have a faculty union. And I and a few others helped start a union. We asked the administration to allow us to have meetings on campus. We had a faculty senate. I mean, let me see. We asked, and they wanted to block any effort that we would make to start a faculty union. Now, of course, they don't want a union, So I remember I rode the shuttle bus downtown and talked to an attorney and said, we're not able to. The state constitution makes it possible for everybody in universities to meet together on campus to create a union, but we need to get the salary figures for the whole university. We need to see what the administrators are, what raises are they giving themselves when they tell us they're broke and can't give us a raise. So our attorney, he would call the university and say, you've got to release those salary figures. And that's, everything is supposed to be public in a public university. That is public. They said, yes, but we really can't, we don't even have, they put us off, and finally I said to this attorney, I went back down, I said, listen, Jim, I said, if you don't think, threatened something that the fact so those of us would do if we couldn't get the figures, I said, we'll have to sue the university, or I forget. And so he said, oh, well, okay. So he made one more call. He said, we're going to file suit tomorrow if we don't get those figures. Well, the next day, we got them. They were placed in the copy of everybody's salaries were placed in the library. One copy in the library, okay. Oh, I tell you, when people saw that, the people that hadn't particularly wanted a union, they did. Oh, the salaries they were giving each other. So, yeah, now, I mean, as it turned out, the union we formed, and I was not very active, I wasn't active in that. I mean, I felt I'd done enough, and I didn't want to, frankly, do all the work to decide how to set up our union. We saw that, yes, everybody was mad. We had a vote of the whole faculty, and it passed fairly well, fairly substantially, although the College of Medicine people weren't interested, but there weren't enough of them to kill it. So we had a union, and a friend of mine in another department, she loved organizational work like that now, and she kind of took over and did a good job of getting the union, forming the committees and all we would need, and so the vote passed, and we set up. We decided to call it the AAUP union. It wouldn't have been my first choice, but it's all right. And the first year, we had a walkout. I mean, we went on strike because they weren't going to give us what we saw clearly they needed to give us for various, mainly pay, but other things, leaves and all or something were in question. So we all stood out in front of McMicken Hall, and signs and all. We stayed out of class for a few days until they signed a contract, and so lo and behold, we got about a 20% raise. And students need a union. You know that? Students should always have a union. Adjunct teachers around the country, in some places, are forming unions. I mean, cheap labor, we hire people to teach freshmen English or whatever for almost nothing. They can't live on, they have to have another job. They need a union. In fact, I said about the union, work in the adjuncts, they can be part of it. No, most faculty said no, that wouldn't work. It would have been difficult because they were kind of traveling. You never knew who would be the adjuncts. That was the pity of it. That university would just hire them at the last minute often when they realized they had too many freshmen in classes. So they'd call up somebody that would agree to come next week and teach. I mean, God, it was slave labor, you know. So, we weren't able to include adjunct part-time teachers in the union, and to this day, I mean, this whole adjunct class around the country is larger, I believe, I haven't studied, larger than it has ever been, I understand, because the corporations that now own the universities, in effect, they do. In effect, they own us, as I see it. They want cheap labor. More and more adjuncts, more and more part-timers. Didn't you have a good many adjunct teachers in your first year? Or did you?
I'm not sure. We were all online, so I wasn't
right.
aware.
Oh my gosh, I'm forgetting about that. Right. Well, I hope that doesn't go farther and farther, because I do not trust the people that run universities anymore. No, I don't. See, they have a board of trustees. I forget how we get that board. Somebody votes on them, I guess. Or does the university just appoint it? I don't remember. I steer clear of it. I gotta steer clear of something. But it is a problem. I know my grandchildren goes to Ohio State. And she has a lot of part-time teachers. I mean, she's fortunate. She does have an older guy that's her main, she studies environmental science. And she has a professor that she's very close to, and they work together on a lot of things. So, some good things happen in universities even now. But my God, the wealth is poured into them, and particularly Columbus. Whew. Oh, very, very rich people are the main stalwarts of, they provide. If you have a new building, it's named for one of them, So we're a long way from home on that. But thank God, isn't it strange? I mean, good people do manage to do some decent things. Even now. The country is poor. This is a very poor country. We're almost like a third world country. The rich and the poor. We're almost like a third world. Most people are struggling in this rich country where everybody could prosper. In my opinion, at least. And a lot of very poor people, God, that don't even know where their next meal is coming from. And think of the homeless in this town. Tremendously more than 30 years ago. More and more.
Speaking of the wealth of the university, how do you feel about the university putting more money into campus expansion rather than other areas?
I don't know. Let me see. Well, even that whole new law school, wait a minute, was an issue, the way it was built. Some people got a lot more out of it than should have. I don't really know what is going on.
It's just ongoing cycle of rebuilding things, tearing down old buildings, making new ones. It's
Oh, well, I mean, of course, in my time, the old library, so-called, is now the law school on campus, on main campus. The new library, the library that you would use, is what I call the new library. Even though it's now, what, 30, 40 years old, I guess? Well, not quite that. That old library that's now part of the law school, right on the corner of, sure, I can't even call the street names, of,
Calhoun and
yeah, and
Clifton.
Clifton Avenue, yeah.
Okay.
That's a beautiful building.
Yeah.
Oh, that is a gorgeous old building.
Mm-hmm.
It just broke my heart when it was closed as a library, and they built that monstrous thing on the back of campus.
Yeah.
There's nothing pretty about it. I mean, it's all green vinyl or something. Yeah, gosh.
Well, Dr. Stevens, I want to be mindful of your time. It has been a little over an hour. Is there anything that I haven't talked about or asked you about that you would like to talk about?
Well, yeah, okay, let me see. The new book that I am completing, it has to do with UC of all things. I mean, because for years I didn't write anything about it. It has to do with those early years of mine. But it has nothing to do with my work around the radiations. I mean, it's kind of amazing that I was also doing other interesting, fun things. And so I will describe one day. It was one of my worst days at UC, and in my life, one of my worst days. I had this little group of friends. They didn't know anything about radiation tests at all. This was another part of my life, so to speak. I had the Junior Faculty Association, people in other departments that were anguished about the war and what was happening in medicine. And then I had this little group of friends that had a lot of fun together. Now, I don't drink or anything, but I mean, there was a lot of partying and drinking. I would just sort of be with them, but they were so funny that I liked to be with them. And a man that I call in my novel, and I still don't want to mention his name, even though he is gone. He wasn't gone when I started this book I'm speaking of. I call him Arnaldo Gill in my book, and a lot of my new book it's a memoir, but I changed names, And he's the funniest man I've ever met, and a brilliant man, totally brilliant. He'd read everything in the world, and he was so funny. So we had these little friends of mine. Every Friday, we would walk over through campus to a restaurant right over there in Clifton. If I can even call the name. Viennese restaurant. I forget the name of it. God, how could I? Well, we walked over there every Friday. We had this thing where we loved to get their lobster pancakes. And it was one spring day. They came by, the other three guys, the four of us. And we had other friends, but mostly it was these four. We were four. And we all walked through campus. It was so pretty. Campus was very beautiful. I guess it still is. I mean, all the trees, the apple blossom over there, it was a beautiful spring day with all the blooms coming out and all. And so we walked through past the old library and across Calhoun and the next street over was our little Viennese restaurant. And we knew the people there. I got to know the owner and all. It was very much a little family thing, and built out of what was once an old manse over there. And so we sit down, we have our lunch, and some merriment, and some people, I'm sure Arnaldo Gill had his drink and all, or wine. So, we started back to campus. We had been here 3 years. We weren't up for tenure. We had at least one more year, maybe two, before we would be decided on for tenure. But we did have appointments with the head that afternoon. We knew that we needed to be back in the department by around 2 o'clock. We each had 15-minute appointments. So we come back into McMicken Hall. We're feeling good. And we all decided to go to my little office because it was right down the hall from the main office, where we would go to talk with the chairman about our contract. You got 3 years, and then normally that was renewed for 2 years, and then it was up or out. It's the way things were working, had been for some years, I think. So we're waiting for our time in my little office, and okay, all right, well, I guess I think Arnaldo, you're first. Yes, I think I am. And so we hear him. The other three of us wait there in the room.